Yeah, man. About to go get this $1,000 out for the fans, man. Really, I'm gonna take out 20,000, man, just to show people. You feel me? I'm on a whole different level with this, man.
It was the early morning of September 2nd, 2012, in Chicago's uptown neighborhood. The city was quiet, streetlights casting a soft glow over empty sidewalks, when a violent betrayal unfolded behind the doors of a cozy apartment. Inside lived 46-year-old Yolanda Holmes, a vibrant, generous woman who had worked hard to build a comfortable life. Not just for herself, but for the son she adored. That morning, her home became the scene of a brutal, calculated act that would shock everyone who knew her. Police were called to Yolanda's residence after a 911 reported disturbance. What they found inside was devastating. Yolanda had been attacked in her sleep, shot, and stabbed in a frenzy of violence. It was not a random break-in. The brutality of the assault suggested something far more personal, more deliberate, and far more chilling. Friends and neighbors were stunned. Yolanda wasn't someone who made enemies. She was a hairstylist with a warm smile, a nurturing presence, and an unshakable love for her son, Carmaine Wilson. Known to many as Young QC, Carmaine was an aspiring rapper, often seen in flashy clothes, driving a Mustang his mother had gifted him. The bond between them seemed close. She had supported his ambitions and celebrated his dreams. But as investigators began piecing together the events leading to Yolanda's death, the narrative shifted from a story of tragedy to one of unimaginable betrayal. Phone records, witness accounts, and financial motives began painting a picture that no one wanted to believe. Her own son was at the center of it all. Authorities would soon uncover that Carmaine had hired a hitman, Eugene Spencer, to kill his mother. The reason? Money. The inheritance. The life insurance. The control over what she had worked her whole life to give him. Even more disturbing, prosecutors revealed that Carmaine had instructed Spencer to make sure the bee is dead. The coldness of that statement would linger in the minds of jurors and the public alike. And while Yolanda's loved ones were grappling with her violent end, Carmaine's behavior in the aftermath added another layer of cruelty. He withdrew thousands from her bank accounts and flaunted it on social media, even filming himself tossing wads of cash to a cheering crowd. The image of him smiling, basking in attention, while his mother's memory was still fresh in funeral programs, became an enduring symbol of the case's horror. This was not just a murder of a mother. It was a murder of trust, of love, of the bond that many see as unbreakable. The story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about greed, entitlement, and the corrosive power of image-driven ambition. In the minutes ahead, we'll walk through Yolanda's life, the warning signs that went unnoticed, the chilling details of that September morning, and the court proceedings that led to a sentence of nearly a century behind bars for her son. It's a story that will leave you shaken, but it's one you'll want to hear until the very end. Yolanda Holmes was the kind of woman whose presence lit up a room. Born and raised in Chicago, she carried herself with a confidence that came from years of hard work and self-reliance. She was a hairstylist, not just by trade but by passion, transforming her clients' looks and boosting their self-esteem. Her salon chair wasn't just a place for beauty. It was a place for friendship, laughter, and heartfelt conversations. She loved her community, and they loved her back, often describing her as the life of the party and a woman with a heart of gold. Outside of work, Yolanda's greatest joy was her son, Carmaine Wilson. She had raised him largely on her own, pouring her time, energy, and resources into making sure he had opportunities she never had. Friends recall her talking about him constantly, beaming with pride at his music ambitions, and doing everything in her power to support his career. For Yolanda, being a mother wasn't a role, it was her calling. Carmaine, who went by the stage name Young QC, had dreams of breaking into the rap industry. He often presented himself as someone destined for fame, dressed in designer clothes, driving flashy cars, and maintaining a polished social media image. Much of this lifestyle was made possible by Yolanda's generosity. She not only gave him emotional encouragement, but also financial support, helping to fund his music pursuits and personal expenses. To the outside world, their relationship looked close. They attended events together, took smiling photos, and Yolanda proudly introduced him to friends and clients. She wanted nothing more than to see him succeed, and she was willing to sacrifice her own comfort to make that happen. But beneath that picture-perfect image, there were subtle signs of tension. Some friends noted that Carmaine seemed entitled, accustomed to a certain standard of living that Yolanda struggled to maintain. Others said he could be dismissive of his mother, brushing off her guidance. Still, no one could have imagined that these dynamics could lead to something so dark. Yolanda's devotion meant that she often overlooked red flags, whether it was his spending habits, his growing obsession with image, or the circles he surrounded himself with. She continued to believe in him. She defended him when others questioned his choices and held on to the hope that his career would bring him happiness. That's what makes the story so haunting. Because when you look at Yolanda and Carmaine's history, you see a mother's unconditional love, and you expect that love to be returned. Instead, what unfolded would become one of Chicago's most shocking and heartbreaking cases of familial betrayal. From the outside, Yolanda and Carmaine's relationship looked like a textbook example of a strong, single-parent bond. They spent holidays together, appeared in each other's social media posts, and often shared public displays of affection and pride. Yolanda's friends and clients frequently heard her gush about her son's talent and determination to make it big in the music industry. To her, investing in his dreams was just another way of expressing her love. But behind that public image, the dynamics between them were more complicated. Carmaine had grown accustomed to a lifestyle that required constant financial support. Expensive clothes, high-end cars, and flashy jewelry didn't come cheap, and Yolanda's hard work often went directly toward maintaining his image. While she gave willingly, the unspoken pressure to keep up with his expectations weighed heavily on her. Over time, those who knew them began to notice an imbalance. Yolanda seemed to be giving far more than she was receiving, not just financially, but emotionally. She was a mother who listened, comforted, and encouraged, while Carmaine, at times, appeared indifferent to her sacrifices. This wasn't outright hostility, but it was a subtle disregard that hinted at a deeper lack of appreciation. Carmaine's growing focus on fame and money also shifted his priorities. He became increasingly concerned with public perception, often flaunting wealth on social media. Friends later recalled that he spoke more about material success than personal relationships, and his sense of entitlement only seemed to grow. This self-image, combined with financial dependence, created a troubling dynamic where Yolanda was both his greatest supporter and his primary source of income. Warning signs began to emerge, though they may not have been obvious at the time. He surrounded himself with people whose values didn't align with Yolanda's, and there were whispers about questionable activities within his social circle. Still, Yolanda, ever the optimist when it came to her son, chose to focus on the positives. She believed in his potential, perhaps convincing herself that the rough edges would smooth out with time and success. In some ways, Yolanda's unconditional love may have blinded her to the risks. Parents often see their children through a lens of hope, assuming that any missteps are just part of growing up. But in this case, the entitlement, financial dependency, and disregard for her sacrifices weren't just personality quirks. They were early warning signs of something much darker. Friends later said they wished they had spoken up more, or that they had pressed Yolanda to set boundaries. But no one could have predicted the ultimate betrayal. The people closest to them didn't see a ticking time bomb. They saw a son chasing his dreams with the help of a supportive mother. That's what makes this case so haunting, because the danger didn't come from a stranger or an obvious enemy. It came from someone Yolanda loved more than anything, someone she had raised and nurtured, someone she believed would never hurt her. In the final days before the tragedy, Yolanda Holmes carried on with her usual routine. She was running her beauty salon, spending time with friends, and keeping in touch with Carmaine, who was busy projecting his lavish lifestyle online. There was no public sign that something sinister was unfolding. To those around her, Yolanda seemed content, focused on her work and her loved ones, unaware that danger was drawing closer, not from the outside world, but from someone she trusted above all. Unbeknownst to Yolanda, her son had been planning something unthinkable. Carmaine Wilson had enlisted the help of 2 accomplices to carry out a murder-for-hire plot. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act. It was a deliberate decision, born from greed and a cold calculation of what her death could mean financially. He was a beneficiary of her life insurance and saw her passing not as a devastating loss, but as a means to fund his desired lifestyle. On the night of September 2nd, 2012, the plan came to life. Yolanda was at home in her uptown Chicago apartment when one of the men, Eugene Spencer, entered. It was the early hours of the morning, the kind of quiet time when most of the city is asleep. Spencer confronted Yolanda, and in a brutal and senseless act, she was shot in her bed. The apartment, once filled with the warmth of Yolanda's laughter, became a silent crime scene. But the cruelty didn't end there. Reports later revealed that Carmaine had instructed Spencer to make sure she's dead and also harm Yolanda's boyfriend, who was in the apartment that night. Though her boyfriend survived the attack, the violence left a physical and emotional scar that would never fully heal. The details shocked the community, not just the act itself, but the heartless precision with which it was carried out. As news of her death spread, friends and family were overwhelmed with grief and confusion. They couldn't comprehend who would want to harm Yolanda, a woman known for her generosity and kindness. In those early hours, no one suspected that her own son could be behind it. They clung to the hope that police would find the real killer quickly, never imagining that the investigation would lead back to the person she had raised and supported all his life. Meanwhile, Carmaine wasted no time making choices that would later become key evidence in the case. Within days of his mother's death, he accessed her bank accounts, withdrawing large sums of money. He even spent thousands to customize his Mustang with gold-painted features. To investigators, his behavior was more than suspicious. It was callous, the actions of someone who saw his mother's death not as a tragedy, but as a payday. When the truth began to surface, it shattered everyone who had known Yolanda. The idea that she had been betrayed by her only child was almost too much to bear. Friends who had once celebrated their close bond now had to face the reality that Carmaine had orchestrated her murder. The narrative of a loving mother and her ambitious son was replaced by a story of greed, betrayal, and unimaginable loss. The final hours of Yolanda Holmes' life were ordinary, peaceful even, until they became the setting for an act of extraordinary cruelty. It's that contrast between the warmth of who she was and the coldness of how she was taken that makes this case linger in the minds of everyone who hears it. When police first arrived at Yolanda Holmes' apartment in uptown Chicago, the scene told them they were dealing with a targeted killing. There were no signs of forced entry or ransacking, which suggested this wasn't a random break-in. Detectives immediately began piecing together the final hours of Yolanda's life, speaking with her boyfriend and neighbors, combing through surveillance footage, and checking phone records. In those first days, suspicion swirled, but few could imagine the ultimate suspect would be her own son. Early leads began to point investigators toward Eugene Spencer, a man known in the neighborhood. Cell phone data, witness statements, and other physical evidence connected him to the crime scene. But the deeper detectives dug, the more troubling connections they found between Spencer and Carmaine Wilson. Financial records revealed that Carmaine had been moving large amounts of money from his mother's accounts almost immediately after her death, a move that sent up glaring red flags. Investigators also uncovered an unsettling paper trail. Carmaine was the beneficiary of Yolanda's life insurance policy and had recently been in financial distress. These findings, coupled with a quick spending spree following her death, including customized gold features for his Mustang, began to solidify a disturbing theory. This was not a crime of passion or opportunity, but a murder for hire orchestrated by Yolanda's own son. With mounting evidence, police brought Carmaine in for questioning. Initially, he denied any involvement, portraying himself as a grieving son. But inconsistencies in his statements, paired with the financial and phone records, weakened his story. Detectives pressed on, eventually uncovering communications that linked Carmaine directly to arranging the killing. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and the picture was grim. The Cook County State's Attorney's Office formally charged Carmaine Wilson, Eugene Spencer, and another accomplice, Lorianna Johnson, in connection with the murder. Prosecutors argued that Carmaine had lured Spencer into the plan, offering payment to take his mother's life. Johnson's role, according to authorities, was to act as a driver and help coordinate movements that night. The case was laid out as a calculated, financially motivated murder. The trial revealed chilling details. Prosecutors presented evidence showing Carmaine had told Spencer to make sure she's dead after initially wounding her. They also highlighted his post-crime behavior, which painted a portrait of someone more interested in flaunting newfound wealth than mourning a loss. Witness testimony, phone records, and bank transactions all worked together to create an airtight case against him. In 2020, the verdict came down. Carmaine Wilson was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to 99 years in prison. Spence was also sentenced to 100 years, and Johnson received a 14-year sentence. The sentencing brought a measure of justice for Yolanda's friends and family, though it could never fill the void her death left behind. Even as justice was served in the courtroom, the case remained a haunting example of betrayal at its deepest level. A mother's unconditional love had been met with unimaginable treachery, and the community was left grappling with the question of how someone could turn so completely against the very person who gave them everything. In the months following Yolanda Holmes' murder, the question of why loomed larger than anything else. Prosecutors painted a stark picture of Carmaine Wilson's motive: greed. Court testimony revealed that Carmaine, who once aspired to be a rapper known as Young QC, had grown frustrated with the pace of his music career and the limits of his financial resources. With his mother's life insurance policy and bank accounts in sight, prosecutors argued that he saw her death as a shortcut to the lifestyle he craved. Evidence introduced in court was chilling in its clarity. Within days of Yolanda's death, Carmaine withdrew thousands of dollars from her accounts, posted photos on social media flaunting cash, and spent lavishly on luxury car modifications. These actions weren't hidden. They were broadcast for the world to see, leaving little doubt about his priorities. For many, this exhibition of newfound wealth was as disturbing as the crime itself. Prosecutors emphasized that this wasn't a crime committed in the heat of the moment. It was meticulously planned. They detailed how Carmaine had contacted Eugene Spencer, offered payment, and even instructed him during the attack to ensure his mother didn't survive. This level of cold calculation, paired with the immediacy of his spending spree, solidified the state's argument that greed was not just the motive but the driving force behind the murder. The aftermath rippled far beyond the courtroom. Friends and neighbors of Yolanda, who knew her as a giving and community-minded woman, were horrified by the betrayal. Many struggled to reconcile the image of a devoted mother with the reality that her only child had orchestrated her killing. The emotional wound deepened for those who remember Yolanda's tireless support for her son's dreams, now knowing that generosity had been repaid with deadly intent. Carmaine's behavior after the crime became a public fascination and outrage. Media outlets covered his extravagant purchases, his bold social media posts, and even his seeming lack of remorse during the trial. For some, it became a cautionary tale about entitlement and the corrosive power of greed, showing how personal ambition, when twisted, can override even the strongest family bonds. For the legal system, the case stood as a textbook example of how circumstantial and direct evidence can weave together to reveal motive. The combination of financial records, witness testimony, and the defendant's own public behavior made it nearly impossible for the defense to offer an alternative narrative. In the end, the jury's decision reflected the clarity of that motive and the enormity of betrayal. In the years since the sentencing, the story has continued to resonate, not just as a tragedy, but as a reminder of how greed can hollow out relationships and corrode morality. For those who love Yolanda, the wound remains open, but so does a memory of her generosity and strength, a stark contrast to the selfishness that ended her life. Her legacy, in many ways, has become a rallying point for conversations about trust, family, and the dangers of unchecked ambition. The murder of Yolanda Holmes at the hands of her own son forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, family bonds, and the destructive potential of greed. It's a case that strips away the romanticized notion that parental love is always reciprocated and shows us that betrayal can come from the very people we trust most. In this instance, it wasn't just a crack in the bond between mother and son. It was a complete shattering, one driven by self-interest so extreme it overshadowed basic humanity. One of the most striking themes in this story is entitlement. Carmaine Wilson didn't just want financial stability. He believed he was owed a lifestyle of wealth and luxury, even at the expense of the person who gave him life. This toxic mindset is not isolated to one case. It's a growing reflection of how consumer culture and instant gratification can warp values, particularly for those who tie their self-worth to material possessions. Social media played an insidious role here as well. Carl Main's public flaunting of cash and lavish purchases after Yolanda's death wasn't just about spending. It was about validation. In a world where likes and comments can feel like currency, his behavior shows how online platforms can amplify narcissism and desensitize people to moral boundaries. This raises an unsettling question. How often do we see curated displays of success online without knowing the darker truths behind them? Another theme is a failure of empathy. In healthy relationships, especially between parent and child, empathy acts as a safeguard against harm. But in this case, that safeguard was missing. Carl Main was able to view his mother not as a person with life and legacy, but as a means to an end. This dehumanization is a common thread in many crimes, whether they're driven by greed, power, or revenge. From a societal perspective, Yolanda's murder also forces us to look at how financial dependence and opportunism can intersect. Yolanda supported her son's ambitions, investing time, money, and emotional energy into helping him succeed. Yet instead of fostering gratitude, that support may have unintentionally reinforced the idea that she was a resource rather than a person. It's a harsh reminder that enabling without boundaries can sometimes have devastating consequences. The legal outcome of this case also sparks broader reflections on justice. While Carl Main's 99-year sentence ensures he won't harm anyone else, it doesn't restore the life that was taken. For Yolanda's loved ones, justice is a hollow victory, one that acknowledges a crime but cannot heal the wound. It invites ongoing dialogue about what justice truly means in cases of intimate betrayal. For the public, the story serves as both a cautionary tale and a moral checkpoint. It forces us to ask difficult questions about our own values, our relationships, and the ways in which we measure success. Are we teaching gratitude and empathy to the next generation? Or are we cultivating a culture where personal gain is worth more than loyalty, love, and human life? In the end, Yolanda Holmes' life, and the brutal way it ended, reminds us of the fragility of trust. It challenges us to see beyond appearances, to pay attention to warning signs in those we love, and to actively cultivate relationships rooted in respect and care. Her story should not fade into a mere headline. It should live on as a call to value people over possessions and love over greed. Yolanda Holmes' story is more than just a criminal case. It's a deeply human tragedy that demands we take a closer look at the values we nurture in our homes and communities. Every parent deserves to know that the love, sacrifices, and support they give their children will be met with gratitude and respect, not betrayal. Yet, stories like Yolanda's show us that this isn't guaranteed, and that's why awareness is so critical. By openly discussing cases like this, we break the silence around uncomfortable truths and make space for conversations that can prevent similar tragedies. One of the most important calls to action from this case is to strengthen emotional and moral education in our families. We talk to children about success and ambition, but we also need to teach them empathy, gratitude, and the value of human relationships. This isn't just a job of parents. It's a community effort. Schools, youth programs, and even faith-based organizations can be powerful spaces for instilling these values. We also need to encourage vigilance when it comes to warning signs in family relationships. If someone exhibits consistent selfishness, manipulation, or disregard for others, those behaviors should be addressed early. These traits don't emerge overnight. They're often part of a pattern. By talking openly about these red flags, we can create safer family dynamics and protect vulnerable individuals from harm, whether emotional, financial, or physical. In the broader societal sense, we must challenge the dangerous allure of performative wealth and online validation. Carl Main's obsession with flaunting material possessions was fueled in part by a culture that rewards showmanship over substance. As a community, we can combat this by celebrating acts of kindness, integrity, and real achievement, not just flashy displays of money or status. Supporting victims' families is another vital part of this call to action. While justice systems deal with the legal aftermath, communities can step in to offer emotional support, memorialize victims, and help loved ones rebuild their lives. Whether through organized vigils, scholarship funds, or simply being present for grieving family members, we can help ensure victims are remembered for their lives, not just their deaths. Awareness also means holding difficult conversations with young people about boundaries, entitlement, and accountability. These discussions might be uncomfortable, but they can make a world of difference. In some cases, they might even prevent tragedies like Yolanda's by helping someone realize the harm in their thinking before it escalates. Finally, this case is a reminder to all of us to value people over possessions. It's easy to get caught up in the pursuit of material success, but stories like Yolanda Holmes' show us that love, trust, and human connection are far more precious. If her story inspires even one person to cherish their family a little more, or to step in when they see dangerous patterns forming, then her life and her loss will have left a lasting impact. The story of Yolanda Holmes is one of those tragedies that stays with you long after you hear it, not just because of the violence, but because of the heartbreak behind it. This wasn't a case of strangers or enemies. It was a mother who gave everything she had to her child, only to be betrayed in the most unimaginable way. That betrayal cuts deeper than any headline can convey, and it leaves us grappling with painful questions about love, trust, and family. As we reflect on her life, we have to remember that Yolanda was more than just a victim in a court file. She was a vibrant woman, a business owner, and a mother who worked tirelessly to give her son the best opportunities. Friends and family describe her as someone full of life and generosity, someone who deserved to grow old surrounded by the love she poured into others. It's devastating to think of how her story was cut short. In examining the choices her son made, we also see the dark side of entitlement, greed, and ego. These are not just personal flaws. They're destructive forces that can be fueled by societal pressures, toxic influences, and unchecked behavior. If anything, this case forces us to ask ourselves how we can intervene earlier, how we can talk to our children about gratitude and respect before resentment and selfishness take root. But Yolanda's story shouldn't be remembered only for the way she died. It should be remembered for the love she gave, the lessons she taught, and the light she brought to those around her. That light may have been stolen, but it can still inspire change. It can still remind us to hold our loved ones closer, to appreciate them while they're here, and to never take relationships for granted. This is also a call for communities to stay alert, to notice when someone is showing signs of manipulation, hostility, or dangerous thinking, and to act before it escalates. Intervention might be uncomfortable, but it can be life-saving. We can't assume it won't happen to my family, or that's just how they are. The truth is, tragedies like this often happen in the very places we think are safe. As you watch this story unfold, I hope it moves you to action. Talk to your friends, your children, your community. Share Yolanda's story, not for shock value, but to honor her and prevent other lives from being lost to greed and betrayal. Let her memory be a warning and an inspiration at the same time. If you found value in this story, if it made you think, if it touched your heart, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe so we can continue telling these important stories. Together, we can honor victims, learn from the past, and work toward a future where love is never met with violence, and where family truly means protection, not harm.